Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. Right before we start, we just want to remind you about Flipping the Barrels, Pursuing Greatness, Women's Networking Brunch event, March 4th at the Petroleum Club. To get your tickets, visit flippingthebarrel.com/events.
Well, today we were super excited to share with you who we have on the podcast. It's Jack Hamlin. Most of y'all might know him from Energy Strong. He's the vice president of Sargent and Lundy, formerly known as Summit Engineering, before being acquired in 2020. He's the co-founder of Energy Strong, which is a grassroots energy advocacy group dedicated to educating the public about the benefits and safety of oil and gas developments. Jack, we're so happy to have you on, and we can't wait to share the world about your story and all the amazing things that you're doing.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on, and super pumped to tell that story and talk to you guys.
All right. The reason I'm laughing, guys, is because this is like take number 100 that we've done today. So we're super excited to finally get this podcast going. But let's get straight into it. Jack, tell us about your upbringing. You mentioned growing up in a harsh environment, single mom. She picked up one day, decided to, drive towards California, but you guys ended up in Denver. Tell us a little bit about what life was like growing up and how that's impacted your life and career and kind of where you are today, where you're actually very successful.
Yeah, it was a hard life, but it was a blessing, right? So I grew up, wonderful mother and wonderful family, all things told, but had a father that just wasn't there for his kids. My mom picked up the family middle of the night in Chicago one night in 1982 and drove west towards Cali and decided to stop in Colorado to rest. And she had a friend out here, ended up planting roots here in 82, and I've been here ever since. And from that upbringing, we modest means. It was a single mom, 4 kids, and taught me early on that if I wanted something out of life, I had to go earn it. Right. So there's like this zero entitlement, nothing was coming our way type mentality. That's a tough place to be as a kid. But through that really galvanized a work ethic that stayed with me my whole year. And that was that, the world's a competitive place. That's the reality. And not too many people care about you, and that's fine. You just got to figure out a way to transcend it and rise above it. And my mechanism to do that was work ethic. I just realized that I could work 8 hours a day. I could work 16 hours a day and double that pay. And that's just how my mind worked. And so it kind of permeated everything I had, from my work ethic to the way I the sports that I played and education, all that. If I was going to do something, I was going to play to win, and I was going to try to be the best at it that I could be.
Do you think that followed into you wanting to be financially stable yourself, because you saw your mom struggle, you saw her get up and leave? You were just about 3 years old when that happened. And that's a huge time frame. They say between 1 and 5 is the most impactful years of your life, really, when you develop your personality, your skills of how you're going to actually, handle situations. So do you think that really changed your mindset on, when I grow up, I'm going to, own my own business? Or did you have aspirations to do that?
Without a doubt. So I remember early on, I just knew that the life I wanted didn't involve just looking at pictures and books. I wanted to go see stuff. I wanted to go experience stuff. I wanted to travel around the globe. I wanted to run a business and build something. I knew just deep down early on, I wanted to kind of control my own fate a little bit and, escape the life that I had, not in a bad way. My mom did a wonderful job. Hardest working, greatest woman on the planet. It was just a life that I saw the center of the world in some other place, and that's where I wanted to be. So part of that was entrepreneurial spirit, and really because of my upbringing, I started working as far back as I can remember, but 12, 13, 14 years old, I was shoveling snow, mowing lawns, cleaning people's garages, washing cars, whatever I could do to make a few bucks. And then from there, went to work at a grocery store and just kind of worked my way up. I've worked since I was 14 and never really stopped, ever. About the longest stint I think I've ever taken off is 14 days when I went to Croatia last year.
That's awesome. We love that work ethic. And it obviously shows because you're successful now, especially after all of those years of ups and downs, because we're going to get into your story. And were you a good student?
I was a horrible student. I hated school. I think my personality's type A, so I like to talk. I always got in trouble for talking
Yeah.
too much. I'm probably undiagnosed ADD, but I just think that's my personality. I don't want to alter that. It was, school, you're sitting at a desk and you're watching somebody teach something they're not necessarily passionate about. They've parroted the same thing for 10, 20 years. And, God bless them, teachers are awesome, but it just wasn't for me. And I had a hard time paying attention. I had a hard time doing homework. I wanted to go out and do stuff and learn other things other than what is being taught, like algebra. And
a lot of things that you don't even end up using.
Yeah, most everything
Yeah.
you don't use, but I was always good at taking tests, and that was probably the thing that saved me the most.
So when you got into college, what did you decide to do? Since you didn't like school that much, what was what did you want to do afterwards?
Well, I went to college because that's what
You're
told to do in life. I wish there would have been a better route. I ended up in a good place. All in all, I'm very grateful and thankful for everything that happened. But looking back, if I was raising children or if I did it again, I would probably opt to not go to college. And I say that, having run an engineering firm, engineers need to go to college, doctors, lawyers, that type of thing. But running a business and stuff, I think if I would have had better guidance and saying, look, you could be an electrician, you could be a welder, you could be an airline pilot or a real estate agent. Really, none of these things require a tremendous amount of capital and money and time like college to go to, and then you're 4 or 5 years behind the curve anyway. If I had to do it over again, I'd probably end up in real estate or aviation and just get started right out of high school.
Yeah, no, that is very true though. And I remember when we spoke, you talked about, looking back, it was kind of like, why did I go to college for what I'm doing today? I really didn't need it. But I would say, in that time, you probably didn't realize it, right? Like when you were in school, you weren't thinking, oh, I don't need this. Did you feel at the time like this is something, you graduate, you get a degree, and then you do the next thing? Was that what was in your mind?
Yeah, I certainly knew that the people and the professors that I dealt with hadn't been in the real world in a long time to really teach kind of the new business fundamentals and things were, I graduated from school in 2001. So it was, this is like the infancy of the internet. So like Windows 98 was revolutionary for anybody listening, doesn't know what that is. That was like the first,
browser.
Windows 95, 98, those were the big operating systems that transformed business as we know it. And then the internet back in 2001, it was still dial-up, it was slow, and DSL and other technologies were coming in. So like the world started changing very fast, and the things that I was learning that didn't necessarily register with the real world jobs that I held and really what the employer's skills were looking for. And so I felt more like I was being trained to go work in a corporation and sit at a desk and churn out X. It was just very uninspiring to me. And part of that's probably, a lot of that's on me. But a lot of it was just that, the stuff I learned, I wouldn't apply hardly any of it today. And all the stuff that I need to know and I can't remember, like a formula in Excel or anything. I just go on Google or YouTube real quick. I'm like, how do I do that? Oh yeah, and you
go find it.
So I think, anymore today, we have all of mankind's knowledge at our fingertips on this computer, on our cell phones. When I'm repairing a motorcycle or fixing my car or doing a remodel project, I just remodeled my office. If I get stuck on, how to move an electrical outlet, I Google it. I don't go to school for it. So I want to be careful and say, I don't say nobody should go to college. I just think that there's other routes to get there. And when you look at salespeople or real estate agents, any of those things, there's a lot of different routes to get there. And I give a lot of speeches to different charities in the area about the oil and gas industry in particular. We have career days at our office, and I talk, hey, we need engineers, we need project managers, we need executives, that's fine. But we also need drafters, and those don't require a degree. We need electricians, we need welders, we need plumbers and pipe fitters. All of those things a degree is not required, and yet there's a great living to be made in trades. And I just think that's an important point. It's something that we really advocate for with Energy Strong. And even though I ran an engineering business, we had a big chunk of drafters and designers and mapping personnel that were not education. They weren't college educated.
No, I think that's really important. And that's a really important aspect of our business too, is not everybody has an engineering degree, which kind of gets us into how you actually got into the oil field in the first place. I remember you said that you're working for IBM and you would drive around at lunchtime and you would see these rigs and these rig hands and these guys working in the field. And you were like, man, that's really interesting. Like, I wonder what they're doing. So what caught your eye initially and what made you, all of a sudden jump and switch, and how did that process go?
Yeah, most of it was that I was leashed to a desk in Boulder at the IBM facility, right? So I started out and right out of school, I went to work at IBM. It was there in Boulder, desk job, managing this group of people, building this knowledge base. It was monotonous and tedious, and you're sitting at your desk eating and staring at a computer screen all day. And on my lunches, I would get out on my motorcycle or my car in the summer and just drive around and just to get a breath of fresh air and get a break from it. And, back then the DJ Basin wasn't quite as prolific as it is now, but all around northern Colorado, where now there's neighborhoods and development, that was all oil field. And so I would drive and I would see, smaller facilities, but I would see like the roustabouts and the drilling hands out there. And then I would go to like the Suncor refinery that's been in Denver since like the 1930s. And I would just sit there and stare at the people doing this work. Like, what are they doing in there? It was like the Wizard of Oz, like couldn't figure it out. But back then you have to understand. So in 2001, early 2000s, this is before shale gas revolution. And we had a huge energy crisis. We had quote unquote hit peak oil. Energy independence was like the rally cry of every politician, Democrat, Republican, and otherwise. We needed energy independence and we needed American oil. So, all government pushed, local and national pushed behind, let's secure our energy source and the things that power our economy. And really, that's what I wanted to be a part of solving. Is there's this huge, almost patriotic duty to figure out how do we power Americans' lives without being beholden to an entity that may or may not like us, and be beholden to tanker ships coming to our shore to fuel our economy, our military, our personal lives. And with that, 2000, right as I got into it in 2006 or 7, the oil field, shale gas started to take off. So that was very good timing. But that was really exciting to be a part of. It went from it was the equivalent to me of landing on the moon. We went from, mostly vertical drilling with no stimulation to just open up Pandora's box and doing it very safely and efficiently.
Yeah, it's crazy to think just how far we've come, but now it's kind of the reverse, right? The energy independence is struggling a little bit. And to your point, we'll talk a little bit more towards the end of the podcast with Energy Strong, is how do we advocate about the energy industry to the outside world who thinks we're all mean, bad people, and that we're polluting the world, and that, so we'll talk about that. But what was your first job in the industry, and kind of how did that go when you first walked in?
Yeah, it was really dumb luck. I started off in the industry with a staffing firm. The staffing firm's still around. It's called Ensicon Corporation. They're Denver based, and it was more or less mothballed. The owner of that company wanted to restart it with seeing kind of the shale boom coming. And so we supported recruiting efforts for both operators and producers, and then of course all the service companies that supported them. So we started off there, and it was in staffing for 5 years. So recruiting and networking, and that blessing was that my network, all I did for 14 to 16 hours a day is talk to people. Wasn't opportunistic. I would just take them to lunch to ask them what they did, what they foresaw the future to be. And then over 5 years, I had such a huge network. At one of my clients at the time, I had gone to work for them, which was another engineering company. I had this good blend of really good network of engineers and project managers and drafters, and then I had a good business acumen of running businesses, and that blended role suited me well. I would go sell work and then staff the work and make sure the work was executed right. And then as things progressed, I thought to myself, well, I think I can build a better business through focusing on really customer service was my main focus. Quality was the quality and safety were always there, but customer service is really a hallmark and a pillar that I stand on. And especially in today's world, it does not exist. And I want it to exist. I want it to be easy to buy from us, easy to course correct, and get a good product at the end of the day. So started in a very basic level in the trenches, cold calling people, trying to get them jobs, move them to this job or that job or this basin to that basin. And back then, as 2006, 7, 8 hit, I mean, it was a circus. So people were, the Permian was going nuts, the DJ was going nuts, North Dakota was just starting to ramp heavily. And it seemed like every day there was a new oil boom in a small town.
How did you know how to place these individuals, since you just started in the industry? You obviously didn't know much about, I'm assuming you didn't know much between a completion engineer to a drilling engineer. And that was evolving during that time too, because completion engineers went from, vertical wells to having to understand how to do a horizontal well. So what was that development skill? How did you,
no, I guess it's like today where right now you have a lot of, emissions reduction and greenhouse gas reduction engineers. You have people focused on things that have never been done before, including like CO2 sequestration. And how that was just an ability. So I had a mindset of, I say youthful, it's not really an age thing, just a mindset of evolve. Like I would sit and talk with people and really truly, what's your dream job? And just get that on the table. A lot of times it was like, I want to get out of Midland, I want to come to Denver, or I want to, sometimes the other way around, I want to go to West Texas and just immerse myself in work and the fast pace without, nothing to do but work. Listen to that. And then when you talk to the clients that needed these people, most of it they were hiring for was a work ethic and an ability to learn. If they had those two things, they could be taught everything. And I've seen that through my whole career. It's all universal. I mean, a lot of the engineers that I had hired, they moved into PM roles or sales roles. They couldn't do any engineering today because it's been out of it for 5 years. And it was really wild. But if they wanted to self-apply and get back into the techniques and the ways that the industry has evolved now, it would take some time to do that. So as long as you've got an ability to kind of self-teach and outwork competition, you'll be okay. And that's kind of what I did.
That's awesome. So was Summit Engineering the first company that you funded or started?
That was the first company that I had. That's the third company that I had ownership in, but that was the first real company where we had employees and we built something. We wrote like a business plan, and we had a 5-year plan to build and sell that business. And we actually sold it 1 week shy of that 5-year plan, which is pretty cool. It doesn't always happen that way. COVID forced our hand a little bit with the impending deal, but yeah, that was the first one where I had a major equity stake, and we were building it basically from the ground up. There was a company that existed, Summit Engineering. It was a group of 1099 contractors that I was brought in to streamline, bring on as employees, come up with a plan to build clients and build projects. And so we went from basically like 6 or 8 people to 150 in 5 years, and went from 2 clients to 160 or something like that. So it was just full throttle.
What was the most challenging thing during that time? Because you were just talking about immense growth within a company that, was evolving. Within 5 years, you sold it. You had to run into some crossroads down that.
Where do I start?
Yeah. What I guess
you only see like, I started a business, I sold it, I'm successful. What was did you guys ever run into something where you're like, okay, we're going to have to close the company, or, run to $0 in the bank account, or?
Yeah, we went negative. So like the first few months we started it up in 2015, which was the beginning of a downturn, if you remember that. And so as we started things up, we were capitalized, but we had, we didn't have much credit to show. So very small line of credit. So we're operating on good accounts receivable and cash flow. So from the get-go, like the first 2 months, I remember I brought in $160,000 of my own money to fund payroll that I then had to go sell work to pay myself back. That's a very scary thing when basically take your whole life savings, put it into a month of payroll, and it's gone in a month. People are expensive, employees are expensive, and when things don't go right, things add up very quickly and can get compounded very quickly. So you had to keep a cool head. So And then I had two business partners. Those were always challenging times. You had three hands on the steering wheel. They were older. I was younger. They were old school. I had, I was a blend of old and new school, but lots of friction there. There was a lot of triumphs, but a lot of friction to get to the triumphs, right? So those things were hard. But all in all, the hardest thing was, when you're growing like that, and even when you're starting with like 10 or 12 or 20 people, you got to remember that all 20 of those people, they have lives, they have families, they have sicknesses, they have extended families that have issues, they have debt. I mean, they have all these things that, your own life is hard enough. And then you compound that by 20 people, and then you get to 150, your life becomes adult daycare almost. And I say that tongue in cheek. I cared about everybody I hired. I tried everything I could. I was personally invested in their lives. I would go to graduations, Christmas parties, birthdays. I would have them to my house. I wanted it to, I didn't want it to be cliche, like, oh, we're a family.
Yeah.
Oh, things slow down, you're fired. I really tried to avoid that when we built it as much as we could. So that was really the hardest. Was I'm out there, I'm running a business, which is stressful. It's cash intensive. You're always on the road in places that aren't that glamorous. Although I love Midland, it's not,
It's not California.
Florida,
Yeah.
It's not Key West. And you're in North Dakota in the middle of winter, negative 30 degrees for a week. And it was just and then to do all of that and come back and have to have the emotional capacity and the discipline to still listen and talk to other people. One of my hallmarks was that when I came in the office every single morning, I walked through the whole office to say good morning to every single person. And before I left, whether it was to go up to the field or go home for the night, I went through and said goodbye to every one of them and just asked how they were doing real quick. And that was huge for me. That was it was 2-3 hours every day sometimes, because people wanted to engage in what we had going on and tell me about their work. But I did it every single day. And if you talk to any of my employees, they'll tell you about that. That was always one of my proudest things, was that I would always be pissed off when I worked for somebody and they'd just walk in the door and walk to their office and shut the door and not ask how I was doing and all that. Small things matter when you're managing people. And when it's that many, it becomes a real big challenge.
It's really interesting to hear that, because such little things like that, like even just saying, hi, how are you? How's your family? Has such a huge impact as an employee, that I think that's a very important character in a leader for sure. The hi, good morning, or it makes you feel like, okay, they care a little bit about me, versus just shutting the door and walking away. So that's amazing.
Yeah, you see a lot of companies, and I think every company at some level thinks or believes that their employees are their greatest asset, and they are. But we ran on really, really razor thin margins. We couldn't always afford to give bonuses and raises. And so a pat on the back, what I found, a pat on the back and recognition always outweighed a few extra bucks here and there. And while money is important and this and that, they knew that if they had the investment from management, that they had other opportunities and bigger opportunities. And down the road, those things really all came to fruition. Really, COVID was the first major hiccup where we couldn't really honor all the promises we had made, and we tried our darndest, but it was just too much to overcome.
That was a common theme with, I think COVID in general. Nobody really could manage what was going to happen. It was that's a once in a lifetime, hopefully, situation, right? So just being in it and everybody and all the struggles that we had, it's just nice to hear though that you tried, right? And that's what matters at the end of the day. Yeah,
we tried everything in a fiber of our being. Some things you just have to accept, and that was a good lesson learned for me, which was, there's a lot of things outside of your control, and I always grew through downturns and things like that through outworking it, right? We had 100 people to keep busy. Even in the worst market, I could find enough work for 100 people. Well, when the world shuts down and everybody's at home and there's no work anywhere, what do you do? That was a very tough thing, but we successfully demobilized everybody, kept our core together. They're there today, and now we're back on growth, and the oil industry looks great, and the narratives are shifting to where things like natural gas are being considered green energy in Europe. So nuclear and natural gas are under the green umbrella, and the narrative that oil is dead is long gone. And if nothing else, this whole pandemic and the resurgence of America and the world has proven that demand's at an all-time high.
Let's talk about age, So when we first spoke, you mentioned that a lot of the success of your career came later on in life, right? Talk a little bit about what kind of advice would you have for, anybody looking up and listening to your story? Because I find, even Jamie and I sometimes struggle with this, where you see all these young people that are successful or that made it at 18 because they started a YouTube channel, or, you compare yourself a lot to, oh my gosh, we're 30 and we still, like there's a lot of that comparison game. But you mentioned like 30 is still so young,
Oh, yeah.
a lot of people make it or really get on their success track like later on, 40, 50, 60s.
No, that's probably the most important question. It's a great one. And I've told this story a few times. If someone gave me a pill and said, look, take this pill and you go back to being 21 and start over with everything new, I would stay where I'm at. I'm 44 next week. I didn't start Summit Engineering and get involved there until I was 36, right? And part of that was you go through these, in your 20s, you really don't know what you're doing. You're kind of like feeling stuff out. Yeah, some people get lucky to start a TikTok channel, whatever. Can't ignore that. It's all about, I'm a believer in like old school still, X's and O's, put in your time, learn one thing, get better, go to the next. And then if you can see you can do something better at the proper age, spin off on your own. But starting your own business, it takes capital. You have to have the ability to take a risk with time and capital, right? So you're putting a lot on the line in the hopes that your idea comes to fruition. A lot of times it doesn't. And if it doesn't, what do? You double down on your work ethic because it's very lonely. And being alone in your 20s and early 30s is miserable. And, and nobody understands what you're doing. You're trying to escape this orbit and people think you're crazy and your ideas are stupid and no one wants to give you your first chance. Mid-30s was a perfect time. And that's when I started Summit at 36. We sold it at 41, 5-year cycle. And I feel like I was 20 when I did it. You still kind of don't know what you're doing sometimes. I mean, honestly, and you're always reacting to these markets. And then about the time you figured it out, there's a downturn. Oh, you got all this money leverage. What do? You got to protect it. You got to trigger with your own mind. Figure out, okay, I got to cut rates. I got to cut my lease, renegotiate this, sell some of the fleet vehicles. I mean, 8 million things go on. So it's very complex. I mean, my point of all of that is that you're never too old. I'm 44 next week. I can't wait to start another business and another one and another one. I mean, I don't know, work till I carry my corpse out of an office somewhere, but
Jack,
I'll be starting off businesses when I'm 65, 70 and still have that energy, because with starting something up, I think like the mid 30s are perfect for, even the 40s or 50s. You have enough experience to know what works and what doesn't, and where to take risk and where not to, and not be foolish, and go do something with a real plan, because you worked your whole life for this little nest egg you're about to bet. So my point there is, yeah, kids in your 30s and 20s, and even some people in their 40s, it is never, ever too late to get anything you want. You got to just come up with a plan and go do it. There's a lot of people with a worse work ethic than you and that aren't as smart as you, for anybody listening, that have started businesses and been successful. So it's, I can't wait to do it again. I think once you've done it and you've gotten over that initial fear, I think that it's just like anything, your growth happens outside your comfort zone. Once you bust down that door, it's, you kind of see things through a different lens, and it lends itself to a totally different perspective on career and life and what success is.
What I really liked is that you defined in your 20s, like you're so right. Everybody in their 20s, you really don't know what you want. And then to just give up, let's say, your college career because you think that, that doesn't matter, let's say, and then you're like, I'm going to go start this business, and then it fails and nobody is, backing you. And then you start to get in your head. And then we deal with a lot of, mental issues now, and like people not being able to accept failure because of social media. I mean, you are big on social media. You spend a lot of time there, and that there is it's very difficult to constantly be in the eye of the public. And I don't think people at that age really understand, because they're still trying to develop who they are. So I think, just like you said, later is almost better, because you kind of, who you are. And so that's not going to hurt you in that path of somebody is negative towards you.
Yeah, one of the lessons that people, I think, learn over time is one that social media, it's just a highlight reel. It's easy. You can look at anything and make it a good story. it's putting in the hard work and the longevity that lasts, right? Doing things for the right reason, doing what's right when no one's looking, just always doing the right thing, and building things with purpose. You can't lose if you do that. If you look at social media, I mean, I got off Facebook a few years ago, and I'm not on TikTok. I'm just on Instagram and LinkedIn. LinkedIn was a professional thing that has morphed into something that's been a really good outlet for me. But yeah, social media, I mean, you got to just take that stuff with a grain of salt. If people are looking to get successful off of TikTok, it's the wrong podcast. This is put in your time, learn it, and be the best that you can, and bring value to an organization. And if you feel like you can go off and do something better, hopefully somebody hears this and realizes hopefully I inspire somebody to do that, right? Like if you're working for somebody, like, God, I could do this so much better. This sucks. This isn't what I signed up for. Go do it yourself. One of two things will happen. One, you'll be wildly successful. Two, you'll realize the people you criticize, sometimes when you're in their shoes, you'd make the exact same decisions. It's hard and lonely when you have to make these decisions, and you're bleeding tens of thousands of dollars a week or a day.
Well, I think that's a good segue though into what you've done with Energy Strong. I mean, you started that about 3 years ago now, and it's huge. Like y'all have like 60,000 plus followers. I mean, that in itself is hard to do. Can you tell us a little bit about like how y'all got into that? What made you start it? And, where'd you even come up with the logo? The logo's awesome.
Cool. So I think it's like 90,000 followers on LinkedIn.
Okay.
We've got and then we've got like 100,000 between Instagram and all the Facebook pages we've got. So we've got a pretty decent following, but when you look at how many people are in oil and gas, we're hoping that continues to grow exponentially here. So, the main thing with Energy Strong was kind of founded out of a necessity here in Colorado. The energy industry came under attack a few years ago, and it started with Proposition 112. Proposition 112 was a ballot initiative in Colorado to basically set back oil and gas facilities a half a mile from any occupied structure or playground or school. And when you drew concentric circles around all of those things in Colorado, it left very little part of the state left open for oil and gas production. What's bizarre about that was the populace defeated that ballot initiative. So we turned it down by a pretty sound margin, like a 12% margin. People said, no, we want to foster oil and gas development in the state. It's a part of the economy and part of our DNA, and we're helping solve a problem. 6 months later, Senate Bill 181 was introduced, which was a legislation from the Democrat-controlled government here in Colorado, and it was basically a setback. It was a whole redoing of the oil and gas industry in Colorado. They weren't there to foster oil and gas. Everything was set to this patchwork of local control. Excuse me. So out of that, Energy Strong was formed because the one thing we realized was that oil and gas didn't have a centralized voice of any kind. Nobody knew where to go get talking points. No one knew where to get data. Nobody knew when there was, everything got decentralized from the state level. So it was all in the towns and counties and the little townships and stuff. So you had to go to these new town hall events to give public testimony and talk, either you're for oil and gas or you're against it, whatever. It was an open forum. The anti-oil and gas group, which some of them were, local citizens, some of them were funded by Extinction Rebellion and others, they showed up to every single one of these town hall meetings to advocate fiercely against oil and gas. We as Energy Strong started to post, hey, we need people in Broomfield, we need people in Commerce City, we need people in Denver. We started mobilizing people to these events, and we started making a difference. Before we would go, it would be like 10 people against oil and gas and like 1 or 2 people for. Energy Strong would, through postings and that, round up a half a dozen or 2 dozen people, anywhere in that range. And we would effectively go change the narrative by, before it was overwhelming anti-oil and gas, and we became pro-oil and gas. And the town hall, the county commissioners and the city town managers, all that, they had to listen to kind of the prevailing sentiment. That's how they make decisions in the democracy, right? So we were starting to mobilize people. We're starting to give them talking points on what the benefit was to domestic oil and gas. A lot of people work in it, they loved it, but they couldn't really articulate exactly, what would happen to energy prices if we have to import it all, or what was the world like back when I got into the industry in the early 2000s when prices swung and we were beholden to other regimes, right? So we told those stories and we just got everybody into one place. We started making merchandise that people could wear, hats and shirts that showed their oil field pride. Those became talking points and engagement articles where, like, wearing a Energy Strong hat at the grocery store, or at Home Depot, or golfing, and people be like, hey, what is that? It happened to me all the time. And I would tell them in the oil and gas industry, and we engineer oil well pad and facilities and pipelines, and we do it safer than anywhere in the whole world. It was a great story to tell. Yeah. And that really, through Energy Strong, was our mission, which was, in my view, the CEOs and the leaders of oil and gas companies and service companies, they have a fiduciary and a moral obligation to defend and promote the industries that they run. And that's one thing that they just do not do for whatever reason. I think the CEO of Exxon is very forward. He's made some commercials, he's been on all over the news and really advocated, but anywhere else, it's very poorly done. And so we were like, well, we'll be that voice. And we started showing up at town halls. We started giving testimony. We started going to the state capitol. We were pretty high level for what we were. And I'm proud to say that today we've got, starting next week, we've got a bunch of commercials airing on network TV, starting in Colorado. We're going to proliferate that out across the country. But we're piloting it here in Colorado that are all pro oil and gas commercials. And we're going to have a steady drip of commercials on the airwaves, on streaming TV, on YouTube channels, on Instagram, on Facebook. We're going to have a constant presence there and a constant drip, not just during election years, but we're going to be focused on educating the common everyday oil and gas consumer in this country, the good that our products and services bring, and the hardworking men and women that make that possible.
Yeah, this is amazing. Honestly, I love Energy Strong. I remember Jamie and I would always send each other posts. I love what you guys do on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And it's basic stuff that a lot of people don't know. Like, thank you, oil and gas, for heating my house. Thank you, oil and gas, for, getting on this plane. And it's crazy when you do talk to people who are against oil and gas and they don't even realize what they're against, or the fact that they need oil and gas so badly, or they're driving somewhere, or what they're wearing, their Lululemons, their hats, whatever, the medical equipment, everything's made with oil and gas. And to your point, we don't do a good enough job as an industry, operators, service companies, everyone who owns a company. It seems like almost everybody wanted to be kind of like behind the scenes, right? Like back in the day, people didn't necessarily want to come out, but you are seeing the Chris Wrights of the world, Energy Strong, more and more people speaking up. And I think these commercials are very needed. And just thank you for, having Energy Strong and, being the voice of reason for the industry. Where can people find you guys? Or like, if anybody who's listening, they want to buy a shirt, or they want to go look at all these posts or the commercials.
Sure. So if you go to energystrong.com, everything is there. Our store is there, all the merchandise. We take all of that money, roll it right back into things like this, creating content, creating commercials. We donate a ton to charities in both in the Colorado area and the nationwide, anywhere that the oil and gas companies are and donate to. But there's areas to donate money to us to help us out. It's a total nonprofit deal. We just put all the money right back in. You have merchandise there. All of our commercials are posted there. There's tons of content there. So there's data, there's slideshow decks and data, including one for elementary schools and middle school kids that has been developed to be able to teach kids and teach people at a very elementary level. This is where your energy comes from. Oil and gas, to me, I mean, if you look at emissions reduction, do you know what country has led emissions reduction globally in the last few years? It's the United States, not even a close second. So how we've done that is converting old coal plants to natural gas. Natural gas is really the only energy source that's had any viable impact on emissions reduction in this country. And it's been massive. So it's a great story to tell. And when you see leaders of these companies, Chris Wright is unbelievable, and he's got the good recognition for it. And people, I mean, I think he's one of the best leaders I've ever seen. I would work for Chris Wright one day.
I think everybody,
we all would.
We love Chris.
I'm a total fanboy of that guy. He is he speaks well. He's a smart guy, and he tells the story that everybody should be telling. We should be ashamed of our story. It's an unbelievably great story to tell. And that's so we empower and create energy in people's lives that allow them to do things like heat their home and travel around the world and cook on a stove. And we cook on a stove, and we do that cleaner and better than anywhere in the world. The U.S. oil and gas industry is more transparent than it is anywhere else on the globe. So really, when you look at places like California and New York, where they shut the energy industry down, the oil and gas industry, what does California do? Then they go import oil from Saudi Arabia and Ecuador, Amazonian rainforest oil, and then they have ships sit out in their ports and run bunker fuel waiting to unload. And that's why when you look at the dirtiest cities in America when it comes to air quality, more than half of them are California. It's port cities that are clogged up with tanker ships and things offloading when they have a resource right under their own feet. So yeah, we need to educate people. We need to continue. The big thing I want for anybody listening to this and your audience is that you need to realize that if you're in the oil and gas industry, nobody is going to come to save you. There's hardly any politicians outside of like Dan Crenshaw that are going to swim upstream of this narrative that oil and gas is bad. But that narrative that oil and gas is dead is long gone. We need oil and gas. Consumption of oil and gas is an all-time high last month. And the world needs it. Even the EIA projections project growth for the next 20 to 30 years. So the industry is vibrant. It's shown to be a necessity. We do great things, especially American oil and gas. Stand up for your industry. Do not be afraid to speak up for it. It's an awesome story to tell. We just got to tell it.
Jack, that couldn't be a better ending. Like, your passion runs through you, and it definitely shows on this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing Energy Strong. Thank you for that message. We're going to be cutting that message and putting it in a video for sure.
Yeah.
And then also for everybody listening, you can come and you can find him also on our LinkedIn and on our Instagram. We're going to make sure to post the Energy Strong video too. So we're going to be definitely helping you get that word out. So thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks. Nice to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Jack.